Um, I, as spoken, have been an actor and a body double and a stuntman for about 30 years of my life. The major portion of my career, um, and was in TV and film. And on this particular day, which I'll probably flash back into some things while I'm speaking, but of areas that are poignant things that occurred prior to me going into film. But as to get directly into the actual incident itself, I was working on the set. We were filming inside the studio at Stu Siegel Productions on Ruffin Road, and we broke for lunch, giving me an opportunity to go take a jog, which I usually did every day during our lunch breaks, get off 45 minutes, and go cash my check at Wells Fargo, which just happened to be down the street. So two birds with one stone. This is great. So I took off my shirt. I was a bodybuilder, so I was in pretty good shape. I wasn't embarrassed about that. And I went to take a jog, and I was going down the street and looking around, thinking how beautiful it was. And San Diego, just a magnificent place to live and to be able to have a life and to work, especially in film. And so I'm jogging down the street and being very appreciative of these moments. And I come to the cross section, which would be Ruffin Road and Claremont Mesa Boulevard. And it's about 3 lanes to an island and then another 2 or 3 lanes to cross over. So it's a pretty big intersection. And as I was approaching the intersection, I noticed it was quite busy and there were some vehicles pulling up, some that were with young people that were not really watching what they were doing. They were kind of having a good time. It's Friday, and I understand, before 4th of July weekend. And so they were putting all their food and drinks up on the dash and laughing, and they had pulled into the walkway. So I went behind them, and I'm thinking in my mind, just to be careful so I don't get run over. And I went across the second lane. Well, there was a somewhat of a vehicle that was blocking my view. When it came to the third lane to enter onto that the crosswalk, the island area, I saw a flash out of the left side of my eye, and a white Ford pickup truck struck me dead on. I went over the hood into the windshield, and my face and body parts went through the windshield. And when the driver realized this had happened, he hit his brakes and sent me flying the opposite direction into the intersection. So I was outside the intersection where the white lines are for the crosswalk, and I ended up flying. They said about 25 feet through the air. So it was substantial. And being that my face and head went and parts of my body went through the windshield, I had a lot of lacerations and things. So as I was flying through the air, I instantaneously, this could have been more than just a couple seconds, my view changed from inside my body to a view above my body. I just maybe 5 feet or so above my body. And I'm looking down, and I can see the automobile. I could see the windshield that was all broken out. And I could see the driver who was on his cell phone at early times. They're the people before they knew not to be on their phone when they're driving. And I could see my body, and I could see the direction of my body, how my head was going, was pretty much the direction of my body's movement. And I'm flying through the air, and I'm looking down at this, and I could see the shock on the driver's face, and it was amazing. And I from that point on, I just continued to rise above my body, and my body, kind of everything was stopped in action right there. Everything was like frozen in time. The automobile was stopped. My body was kind of just frozen in that moment. And I went right into what started to be white light, and then into what I would conceive to be a room like you were placed into a white cloud. There's no you can't differentiate depth or anything. It's just like it's a big cotton white cloud around you. And it was a really nice white, warm white, but bright and light. And I felt very comfortable there, like a hug or a lot of love. You're surrounded by a lot of love and support. And as I began to look and see what, was around me, there wasn't much I could distinguish other than there was this angel, and she was to my right, and she was just standing there. And I at first, I found it kind of interesting because she wasn't looking at me. It was a profile of her, and she was looking straight ahead. And I'm looking over and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, she's beautiful. I'm, and I'm thinking, can she hear me or is she think? And we started having this conversation in our minds, telepathic conversation. And, I'm not shocked. I'm not in any way am I bewildered by this place I'm in. It was almost as if it was, I'd been here before, and I somewhat knew what to expect. And jumping from a conscious analog vocalization using five senses to communicate and to comprehend and to manage within a matrix, you go into this open-ended sensory area in heaven where I could hear her thoughts. I could, I knew she could hear mine, obviously, because we're having this conversation. But what I got from this is that it's just an open venue of communication. There are no lies. There are no deception. What good would it be? You can't deceive when everyone knows how everyone's feeling. You're picking up on feelings, especially. Like, we have to discuss our feelings. People need to stop and say, "Well, I'm unhappy today," or so. There's a lot of this playing off in the matrix here on Earth. Is you're constantly trying to either present a specific emotion or area of thoughts and expressing what you're going through or what you're experiencing at this time. And in heaven, it's just spontaneous. There's no time required for that. People know right away. The angel knew right away how I was feeling. She knew that I was a little upset because what had just happened, because it was consciously in my mind, and she calmed me down immediately. And my attention went from what just occurred, which was somewhat traumatic, to just sharing this moment with this angel. And it wasn't even, I would say, overwhelming to converse with her. It just was natural. And there was so much that was conveyed that there was no misunderstanding, which could create a lot of frustration, I believe, here on Earth, is that the frustration of conveying and attempting to convey thoughts and feelings and emotions, and yet you can't express exactly what you're feeling, and that could be frustrating. And in heaven, you can just take that right off your concern list, because that is all done spontaneously and without any requirements. Or you master it immediately. And so I was excited because I'm thinking, wow, right away I've gotten past all this malarkey, I guess you could call it, this matrix barriers that we deal with here in the physical plane, and on the spiritual plane. We went right past that. Let's get down to business about life and love and light and growth and really, what I felt up in heaven was that she realized that we're all here to help each other, and in helping each other we help ourselves. So to go on and move forward with what I experienced there, she telepathically advised me to let's look at this. So I turned with her, and we both started to watch my life go by from earliest memories. And in this case, the one that sticks most poignantly or vividly in my mind is Christmas with my family and my brother and sister, my mom and dad, and we're opening gifts, and I could smell the tree. And it's amazing because I think back to my mind, what I experienced or how my memories are experienced here on Earth. You have to kind of run through this somewhat muddled field of information to piece the parts back together. But with her in heaven, it was as if I was completely reliving the moment as it actually happened with complete clarity, and there was nothing required to achieve this. It just happened naturally. And I sat there and you're feeling emotions, you're seeing, smelling, and you're a part of it because you are literally in this movie, video, three-dimensional matrix that you're experiencing. It's almost as if you're there, but you're seeing yourself there. And your perspective is from an outside perspective. And these movies continued from my right to left, and they would just blend. They would just blend into the next chapter of my life, and they were always something somewhat significant, like sharing time with friends, happy, really always, literally all of it was happy and good times. Even if it wasn't the best of time, it was a good time because it's an experience. It's a lesson. It's what we're here to do, is to take these experiences and then put them into something, a workable understanding of why we're here and what our purposes are and what our strengths are. And each of us have our own significant gifts that we can use and tap into. So I'm watching these go by, and I'm seeing time with friends and girlfriends and family, and all of it I like to see was it was all happy times. There was nothing negative, so I felt good about that thing, because you're not as if like you're in heaven, and then everything that you know and remember and experience has been wiped from you. It's just another opening to another matrix or another area, and you everything is still vivid from your earthly place and your earthly life. So you're bringing all that forward. So there's no loss of memories, or your mind's wiped clean, and all of a sudden you're a whole new person. That did not happen in the end. Since I didn't lose consciousness, that I never lost. I never went under, never passed out. I was completely conscious through this whole experience, that I can confidently say from the bottom of my heart that it is a true gift, and it is a true magnificent experience to move to this next level. We call it death. I don't see it that way. I see it as an important step in your soul's growth and your achievement to like a caterpillar turning into a monarch butterfly. You metamorphosize into a higher level of consciousness. And it felt like it had happened before, and I expect it to happen again. So as we're going through these videos, and I'm seeing, we come to my older years, and then we're gonna say older years. I was only in my 30s, 40s when I got hit by this truck. That we came to the point where I was run over, and as I'm flying through the air, and I leave my body, and I'm thinking, oh well, this part of this chapter or this communication with the angel is complete. So I turned back to her, and she looked at me and she said, hold on, I have something else I need to show you. So I turned back, and then this beautiful green grassy knoll, it's like a hilltop, and I could see the pathway, a gravel road going around, and there's a big shade tree, and a little boy, a very cute little boy, couldn't be older than 4 years old, throwing a ball with baseball with a woman who, she had her back to me, but I could see she was very pretty, and I had a connection to her, and I had a connection to this boy, emotionally, and that I had not met him. I knew who he was. So I realized that this was my future son and my future wife, which was, I didn't understand because I'd never experienced that yet. And that that this moment was something extremely significant in my understanding of time, because on Earth, we perceive time as a linear pathway that we take, and that things happen to us and we peel and then it goes back and then becomes the past. But in heaven, there is no time, and that it's all just happening, and that is the only way we can consciously comprehend time is through the experience and being a part of that experience. We have to physically experience and mentally experience these moments, these lessons. And in heaven, it's already being, it is, and you are experiencing all of it. And so that I knew that that was my future, and that that was my wife, though it hadn't happened yet, and that was my son, though he hadn't been born. Was quite remarkable, and quite a growing point in my life, and in my ability to comprehend why we're here. So when I realized that, and I knew, though I didn't ask her, she didn't tell me, I knew that was my future. I asked her, well, where am I? Because I wasn't there on that hill, like I was in all the other parts of my journey that I saw during my life lesson and my life experience. And she turned to me and she said, you no longer exist. And I did not hesitate. And I said, well, that's not fair, because this is my life. You're showing me a possibility of my future, and I need to be there, because I'd always wanted to have a son or a child, and I always wanted to be married, and I thought it'd be a great experience. And so I was definitely emotionally attached to this moment that she showed me. And she turned and looked right in my eyes. And that was when, there's no longer a profile of this beautiful angel, but it was her looking at me, and she asked me, is that your choice? And that was the last words I heard from her. And I said, yes, that's my choice. And the next thing I know, I'm not in heaven anymore, and I'm back in my body. And I know right away that I'm back in my body. And I realized, last thing I saw was my head facing the pavement, and my legs the opposite direction. And I thought, I better get my hands behind me right quick, or because I have a split second to protect my head from pavement. So I did. I ended up having some issues. I still have quite a few surgeries on my hands to repair them, but that was okay. I had no problem with the physical issues and repercussions of me getting run over, because of the experience is beyond anything I could have ever dreamt. And I apologize for my emotion, but it's always a difficult thing to express to people due to its impact when I come to that point in the story. But I think it's very important that people realize that there is a certain misunderstanding on life, that death is this horrible thing, and that it hurts everyone, and that it's painful, and that it's, I could not disagree more wholeheartedly. Death is a beautiful thing, but it is not a beautiful thing for those who choose to do it preemptively. You are here, and you have a path, and you can't just leave. You can't just hit the reset button. It doesn't work that way, because you reset right back to right where you were, and maybe even at a lower level, because you didn't learn that lesson. I think it's important that people understand that life is precious, and that all life is precious, and that that your life, you need to look at your own life as being significant, because you can't help others and you can't help yourself if you're not present. And what I mean present is in this present moment, as I am sharing with you, that this is the most important point. It's okay to reflect and it's okay to project, but the important thing in life, and the most important thing that you can do, it's not a beauty treatment. It's not a trip to the gym. It's not acquiring a fast car or an expensive house, or none of that has any value to the experience other than you being present in the moment here on earth. And I believe very strongly about that. And I think that the world could change overnight if people would spend a little less time on their phones and a little more time understanding that when you project love, you receive love in return. And when you project hate and disconnect, you receive that in abundance in return. So best lesson I could ever advise anyone is that learn to love, learn to appreciate, and learn to be willing to give and to sacrifice and go out of your way to help others. And when I mean others, that's all walks of life. That's from a frog to the highest being on this planet, which may be humans. I do not know, but everything in between. So be present, be prepared to experience miracles, because miracles only occur in the present moment. You have to be present, you have to be available, and you have to be alert, and then miracles will present themselves. And if you don't have miracles, it's because you're either focused on the past, which you have absolutely no control or ability to change, or you are focused on the unachieved future, which will be achieved and perfected if you're available and focusing on the present moment. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but that is how I feel about that. And I'm really trying to do my best to reassure people that death is not a negative thing. It is a part of life, and it is not at no point is anything, be it birth or the experience of life or death, a negative. It's all positive, and you make it as special and as incredible as it possibly can be when you are here in the present moment, sharing your gifts, your love, all these wonderful things that each human has provided, that you provide that to others, and then miracles happen. So I'm not sure what point in the story, I think I ended that I was back in my body, and I was going to impact the ground. And when I did impact the ground, I did have my hands to block the pavement, and I fractured both my wrists. But there was this wave of elation that came over me to be back on Earth. One, because I had this feeling, being so fresh from heaven, of just overwhelming love. I wanted to run around and hug everybody, but I had a big smile on my face, and I had energy from deep inside, another source. And I jumped right up, and I walked over to that pickup truck, and since the front windshield was knocked out, I leaned in through the side window, and I asked the driver if he was okay. And he was crying, and he said, "Please, you need to go sit down." And so I walked over to the island. So I did make it to the island, I guess. That's kind of nice. I just thought about that. And I thought I never made it, but I did get to make it there after the incident. And I'm sitting on the island, and then I could hear like all this stuff. I could hear all the sound came back in real time, and of course the five senses, the matrix, the physical world that we live in. And people came around and started asking me and hand me their phones to see if I wanted to make a phone call. And then when they saw my hands, they made the calls for me. And I said, please call the studio, Stu Siegel Productions, and let them know that I will not be coming back today after lunch. And so they did, this woman did very kindly. And then when I looked up to my left, that gentleman had gotten out of his truck, a young man, and he was standing to my left. And I reached out and I held his hand as he was crying. And I was smiling and I said, it's okay. I'm going to be fine. It's okay. Um, and I just had to have that moment with him and let him know and reassure him, wasn't his fault, wasn't my fault. It was just a moment in time that we shared, and that I was truly, truly blessed to be back. I could then hear sirens behind me, and I knew that those were for me. My team was coming to take me to the hospital, and these two gentlemen, two medics, got out of the ambulance and put me on a board and strapped me down because they're concerned about neck and spinal injuries, which I had. I fractured my spine, and I ripped open an artery on my right leg, and my face was messed up pretty good, and my hands are what they are, and I lost a chunk of my back on his truck. They couldn't find that, but they sewed that up, and I'm okay with that. So they took me to the doctor, took me to the hospital, and they sewed me up, and I was told that they couldn't keep me because I never lost consciousness. But they wanted me to call and have somebody come pick me up. So I called my girlfriend at the time. Her name is Gina, and she came and picked me up and brought me back to my apartment. And our relationship obviously grew at that point. That was the woman that I ended up marrying. Though I need to say that through this experience, when you go to heaven and you come back, that, I left my body, and everything that was in the physical world was the same. And when I re-entered my body, which was in the exact same place in midair where I left, you are changed, though it takes a while. It's like an unraveling of this unbelievably huge onion, and you just keep peeling off layers. And at first, I really was embarrassed, and I was very being a stuntman and everything, body double, that being my job, that I thought, like, gosh, I really blew it. This is not what I'm here to do. But in the long run, I realized that it was my gift, and it was the part of my experience that for me to see both worlds and to bring a piece of that world, a piece of heaven back with me that I can now express to others through clear mind and clear thoughts, of the importance of being here and being present, and being, when you're with people and they know and they see that you're with them, it is a transference of energy beyond what you could ever do with an electronic device. And it's important that we know that, and to touch somebody, to hold someone's hand, to transfer that energy is extremely important. And there's so much that is said through touch. It's the closest thing you'll get to heaven. And being in the present moment is the closest thing you will get to heaven, other than being there. And it's through eye contact and looking into someone's eyes and expressing yourself wholeheartedly, and not to be afraid to completely be a part of a moment shared with others and with nature and with the world. So I ended up, we did not stay married due to the fact that I had this experience, and that I'm still trying to comprehend what exactly, my purpose is. Though we did have that son, and he's my best friend, but he is also my son, and to this day I'm so proud of him, Dylan Miller, because of his his ability to touch others and to be a part and to be present. I think that's one thing that I was able to pass to him, as well as Gina. She is a wonderful soul and very passionate about life and others and just love itself. So I really don't know, anything else to say other than the importance of not attaching negativity to death and this step in our life. It's just a natural step. As if you celebrate birth, you could celebrate death. It's knowing that a loved one is going to the next level of their development and their spiritual growth, and that's not a bad thing. Though I again need to impress on people that you can't leave early. This game needs to be played out, and so anyone who thinks that suicide or something like that is the answer is not. It is not. Look elsewhere. Look to love. Look to a moment shared with light, with love, and share that energy. And the first thing you'll do is forget about that thought, and you'll move on to what we're here to do, which is just to love each other. So I healed, and I'm still learning about my path. And every day I wake up early in the morning before daylight, and I talk with the angel and the higher power, and I'm very thankful for being back. A lot of people don't speak highly of Earth, and that they think that heaven is a unique place and a loving place, and almost like the cocoon of your next steps of your spiritual growth. But by golly, heaven, it's just as special. Earth is just as special as heaven. And to be here and to be allowed the opportunity to be amongst other souls that are also learning and growing is wonderful. And once you realize that, you wake up early and you realize that every day is so significant, and every day holds miracles and holds the gift of life and the gift of love. You just need to participate. Set down the battery operated devices and participate in this wonderful gift. Everything else is just a fake matrix, false reality. That is what I was. I was egotistical. I been in the film industry. I was all about my body and all about being a bodybuilder, and I did do spiritual development in regards to reading all the books I could find on theology and philosophy, psychology. I was lost in the physical aspects and the presentation of that than the actual important items that I learned once I came back from heaven, which is at some place in some point in life, you will be young, you will be old, you'll be rich, you'll be poor, you'll be healthy, you'll be unhealthy. And just like up doesn't exist without down and in without out, or it's all a dichotomy of energies, and that coming back here, that you will not always be in the top shape. You'll not always be well-to-do. It's an experience of all these things, and none is right, none is wrong. But you need to be able to accept all of these things and not focus on the physical or the material world, the expense, owning something. Ownership of anything is a false reality, because you own nothing. All you own is your reality, your spirit, your soul, and the moment you can share with another soul and a spirit. Everything else is a fake matrix. All the physical world, ownership of anything it is meaningless. You only own the moment. right now, the present moment, right here. That's all you have. And that I'm sharing this with you, Sabrina. I hope, I'm conveying the things that I believe are what, I learned from going to heaven, is that all the pursuits that I had in the film industry um, were a waste. It was a waste of my time, and I could have spent more time growing and being more a part of people's lives by being present in the moment with them. And I learned that from heaven, is that don't waste your time on things you have no control over. Yeah, that was being fresh from heaven. That was the first lesson, and the most important lesson is that it's not about you. You are the receiver, and you are the you are it to yourself. You are the experiencer of this experience, this matrix that we're living on Earth. But once you go to heaven, you realize that we are all one, and we are all the experiencer. So to be cognizant of the way you interact with others is more important than your perception of your experience. Though that is the way you learn, that it is more important that the free way of communication is your being aware of others and being able to walk in someone else's shoes and understand the suffering and the difficulties and the celebrations and their viewpoint. And when you can combine yours and theirs, then you can come to a understanding or a point of balance where this energy flows endlessly, seamlessly. And when you're not aware and you are only concerned of your benefit in this relationship, then you've missed out because you cut off that flow of energy. So if you can almost place yourself during a moment shared with others, and I'm saying others, meaning all walks of life, all species, plants included, that you're cognizant of that experience that they're going through, and you are doing what you can to make their experience healthy and positive experience, then this energy flows much quicker and seamlessly without misconception or misunderstanding.
I was in a second marriage and with a man that I loved more than life itself, but times had gotten very difficult for us. We went through a period of losing everything through bankruptcy and not being able to even buy food at the time. I had two sons when I came into this marriage, and they were just little babies, like a little over 1 and almost 3. And then my husband Don and I had another son. So I had the 3 boys, but we had bought a business and it was failing, and we were going bankrupt, and it was just a terrible time. And then my 7-year-old son, my son from the previous marriage, our middle son, was hit by a car and died. And at the time, I did not really have any faith in God or belief in the afterlife. So when he died, I had nothing really to cling to, not prayer or reaching out for help or anything. It was about 12 excruciating hours, and when Mark died, I remember going into his room, and he was so cold, and I covered him up and saw a tear in his eye, and I leaned over to kiss him and told him, "It's going to be okay, Marky. Mommy's here," as if Mommy could fix everything. And then I just collapsed. I don't remember a lot after that, but I remember being in the car with my husband and just I can't explain the devastation. But after that, I just withdrew. I wouldn't leave the house. I couldn't speak hardly. I wouldn't allow people to come over. I was just isolated completely, and would sit day after day and just in such grief that my life was over. And so a time came when Don told me, Kat, you have to get out of the house. You can't do this. You have to start moving forward again. We argued. We had been arguing a lot prior to my son's death, but it became, when you're in a financial bind, and Don was not used to that, and here he had this family now that he really didn't ask for, and all this pressure that was crushing in on us. We were about to lose everything we owned, and constant phone calls and harassment. And so, we were just arguing, and I loved him very much, but it was just like there was nothing left in life. So he insisted we go out. So we got out the door, and we were arguing and fighting, and we got in the car, and that escalated more and more. Got out onto the freeway, and it just became an all-out brawl. And Don said, "You just have to move on." And I thought, "I'll never move on." And I came across the car just scratching and slapping and beating at him, and he pulled over and he took his arm and went like that to me and knocked me over to my side of the car. And I literally saw stars, but I just kind of sunk down into the seat and said, "I want to go home." And so he took me home, and I had a tendency when I got cornered in life, I would just run. And I grabbed the car keys and went out and hopped in the car and took off. And he was standing at the door just screaming at me. And I drove, and it was raining, and it was hard to see, and I had this terrible pain inside of me. I thought, what's wrong with me? And pretty soon it got so intense, I pulled the car over and got out, and people were coming by, these splashing water, screaming at me and honking, and I thought, I've got to get home. This pain is just the most incredible pain I'd ever had. So I got behind the wheel of the car, and I somehow got back home, and I'm literally practically crawling up the driveway, and Don's at the door, again, of course, just furious with me. And I got past him, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to call an ambulance. There's something really bad wrong with me." And I said, "Well, you're that bad, I'll take you to the hospital." And just condescendingly talking to me. So we got to the hospital, and he realized that I wasn't putting this on, that there was something wrong. And the doctors came in, and they asked me how I got the bruise on my back. Well, it had been when Don came across the car at me. And but I didn't want to tell him that, because Don was not a wife beater, and I didn't want them to think that. So I just told them I didn't know how I got the bruise on my back. And again, pretty soon they came back in, and they said the test, they didn't have MRIs or CAT scans back in those days. Right, we're talking back in the late 60s, early 70s, and so their ability to diagnose something wrong wasn't there, but my blood count and everything had dropped so drastically, they knew something was wrong. And they said, "We're going to have to take you into surgery to find out what's wrong." Well, I was terrified. I don't even know who these doctors are. It could possibly be that wrong with me. So they put me on the gurney and were wheeling me out the hallway, and I saw tiles going by me, and I was scared, and all of a sudden the gurney stopped. It was Don leaned over to me, and he said, "Kat, I love you." And I thought, geez, I didn't think he even liked me anymore, let alone love me. And so then they took me into surgery, and I remember seeing the physicians and the nurses, leaning over me with their masks on around the table, and I knew that I should go under the anesthetic. I had had surgery before, and I remember just would be total blackness. And so I all of a sudden it did just turn black, but I was awake. And it was like kind of a confused feeling, but I knew where I was, but I couldn't see anything. It was just total darkness. And then I felt myself moving through the darkness into what seemed like a kind of a enclosure, a wall or something, almost like being birthed into another area. And I couldn't breathe, and I was just panicking. It was, I don't know how many minutes it went, but I couldn't breathe, and my lungs were bursting, and I needed to have air. But once I got through into this tunnel-like enclosure, I didn't have to breathe anymore, and it was an odd feeling, but I was okay. And I can't tell you my emotions at the time. I was not frightened, but I was not okay either. I was confused. And as I got through that, I remember seeing Dawn and my other two sons down below me by a lamppost, and it was raining, and they were crying because I had died. And I was trying to tell them, no, I didn't die. I'm fine. I'm okay. And but I knew they didn't hear me. And then I felt this peace that they were going to be just fine and that I could move on. And as I moved forward through the tunnel, I saw 4 human figures standing off to my left. And I think there were 2 men and 2 women. And they looked extremely concerned for me, like I was in for some big trouble or something. I didn't know who these people were. They weren't, I mean, they could have been past relatives that I had never met or whatever, but my son had died. I didn't see him. But we went past these people with these very concerned looks on their faces. And as we went by them, went deeper into this tunnel, I felt peace, not total peace. I was curious. And all of a sudden, I heard this horrendous noise, like a noise that so loud, it was just deafening. This loud, like a freight train coming right over the top of me. And I felt this, like a rope running through the middle of me, going 100 miles an hour, a huge rope. And all of this happening all at the same time, and all of a sudden it stopped. And the thought came to me, there is no God. And then I knew, without any doubt in the world, I mean, I knew that I knew that I knew that God did exist. I mean, it was the most incredible feeling. I had been an atheist most of my life, or agnostic, I'll say. I wanted to believe in God, but I really didn't. And when Mark died, there was no way. I mean, when people would come tell me that he was with Jesus now, I'd say, Jesus, what does your Jesus need with my son? And the anger and the bitterness and just the total frustration in me would just come pouring out. I hated the even thought of the God. And so my language, my feelings, my thoughts towards God were horrible. I denied God in every way possible. I cursed God. What does God need with my son? This Jesus you're talking about. What has he ever done? You know, we've lived in poverty and we've lived without hope and not food to eat. All my life has been this way. So I hated God. I hated the thought of God because I certainly didn't believe he existed. So that happened. And this knowing, God, there's somebody in control here. God really does exist. And then that noise came again and the pulling through my chest. And the thought came to me. The thought came to me, there is no heaven. And all of a sudden, I knew heaven existed. It was a real place. God and heaven are real. This peace, this overwhelming peace that came over me at that time was something I had never in my life felt. It was incredible. This just unexplainable euphoria, peace, excitement, any good emotion that you've ever felt in your life, accelerated 1,000,000 times over. And I saw a brilliant light, and we were moving towards it. I knew God existed, I knew heaven existed, and I was going there. And the thought of leaving my sons and my husband, you know, it just didn't matter. I mean, nothing mattered anymore except getting to this place. And I was about there, and this noise came again, and the pulling through my chest, and it stopped, and I had the knowing there is a hell. And all of a sudden the floor completely dropped out underneath of me, and I started falling into what I knew was hell. And I knew I deserved to be there. I knew that I had blasphemed God, that I hated this God, that this had been my choice to go here. I knew God didn't send me there. It was through my desire to hate God that I was there. God sends nobody to hell. He doesn't. And it's reserved for those who reject God. And the Bible talks about that. You know, it says there's only one way to heaven, and that's our Lord. But, you know, there's more to it than that. I can't really explain it. But our desire should always be to seek our Creator. And to me, that's our God. And So as I was falling into this, knowing I never hit bottom, knowing nobody could ever save me from here, I also felt like I don't think God even knows I'm here. I'm totally separated from everything, even God. But I was wrong. God did know I was there. And all of a sudden, it just stopped. And felt I was just pleading with God this whole time, of course. God, I know you exist. Please forgive me. Please forgive me, Lord. And I was just screaming this out to God, but the hopelessness that I had was just there. I mean, I knew this was eternity. And when I was screaming out to God, and all of a sudden felt that it just stopped. Everything just stopped. And I started going backwards, back into the tunnel, back to where the beginning of the tunnel was. And I heard a voice say very clearly to me, bring people to me. And then I felt myself coming back through the place that I'd come into there. And I felt the will to live enter back into my body. Now, many times, especially in the olden days, people used to talk about when the spirit has left him or whatever. Well, that's an actual thing, I believe, because when I went through the tunnel the first time going in, I felt my spirit leave me. I was separated from that. And then I felt myself coming back through this thing, coming back into the surgery room, and I felt the will to live enter back into me. When that will to live entered back into me, I wanted to live at that point, and I was excited that I was coming back. Before that happened, I didn't want to come back. I wanted, even my husband, the pull of my husband and my children wasn't enough. I wanted to stay there. But when that will to live entered back into my body, I definitely wanted to live. And I came back out of the anesthetic screaming, God is real, God is real. And it's been over 50 years and I'm still screaming that to people. It's been my entire life, and it's as real to me today as it was then. And you can track my record from that day forward. I was I was a God freak, I guess. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I went back to church. Only church I knew at that time was a Catholic church, but I felt God lead me out of that and more into an evangelical church where I could learn about God more, and that was my desire. So I was going to the Catholic church to Mass, and then I would go on Wednesday nights and later on Sunday to this evangelical church. So that was my life, and prayer. I mean, I prayed constantly, and so it was a great time. Nothing anymore really affected me. I knew my son, although I didn't get to see him, was fine, and he was in that place, and I'll be there again someday, and we will be together, and I'm excited about that. I'm excited. I believe that Mark is at the age of reasoning now, and I'm excited to see him, where he would have been. So that death doesn't bother me anymore. Leaving my son doesn't bother me. It's just for a short time. Of course I'd rather have him here, but maybe not. Maybe he would have had a terrible life. I don't know. And so, knowing where he is and how he is an incredible feeling. And, I went to bed one night and I had a dream. This was a dream, not a near-death experience. I had a dream about starting a business. And it was just as real to me as if I was sitting there. And I had always worked at auto agencies, and when I woke up from the dream, I had this desire to start this business. And Dawn thought I was crazy, but I just, I have to do this. And I did start the business back in the 60s. It was, a customer satisfaction deal, where in the car business at that time was just unheard of. I was a very unscrupulous business many years ago. And I started the business, and it's been over 50 years since that's been in existence, and our son has it now. But we became very successful in that, and our walk with the Lord has been great. My two sons walk with the Lord, and my husband does, and I do, and the happiness that we have in our marriage and our life and successes that have happened, I just can't tell you enough. I wrote it in a book. I wrote my memoir, which tells about my childhood and the things I went through there. I went through a horrible childhood. My father was a angry, horrible alcoholic, and so was my mother, mostly to escape my father. We were brought up in horrible circumstances, and wanted to go to college, but they wouldn't. They said you just need to get married and have children. You know, you're not college material, and so I didn't get to go to college or didn't get any normal things in life, and married an alcoholic just like my parents, and he was abusive and horrible, and I had two little sons by the time I was 21, and a nervous breakdown. Packed the kids into an old beat up car, and we left Kansas City to Seattle, Washington, which was about, I don't know, thousands of miles away. Got into government housing. We didn't have food to eat. We'd eat Cheerios 3 times a day, but we had fun. You know, we slept on the floor in sleeping bags. We had a little gas heater stove with a pilot light, and we pretended to start a bonfire, and we're camping. And the boys loved it. They'd run through the house, couldn't break anything. And we played games, and we did puzzles, and we didn't have anything, but I got a good job and afforded us to just have a very low poverty life. But and then I met my husband Don, and we lived happily ever after. That's my story, more or less.
When I was 8 years old, I was on our family ranch riding bikes with my youngest sister, and my older sister, who was actually meant to be cleaning the house, called us in for lunch. And I, of course, had a rebellious streak, and so I wanted to take one more round on my bike. And I headed down the hill into my father's shop, and there was a bump going into it, and my bike stopped on that bump, and I went head over heels. And the moment I left the bike, my body left the bike, and I felt that sensation of flying, something inside of me opened up. It was what people would call awareness or awakening. And it was in full throttle. And it happened in just a split second, because I had only seconds between when I hit the bump, left the bike, and then it felt as though I heard myself hit the floor. There was a distance between me and my body, and I remember hearing my 8-year-old self sigh and crumble, and then everything go dark. And I remember waking up on my back, and it was fuzzy. I was blinking myself awake, and there was a bright light in front of me, and the clearer it became, I saw that there was a rectangle of light coming through what I thought was the garage door. And then outside of that was pitch black. What happened as I was coming into more awareness of the situation, I noticed that the darkness around the light wasn't just, it was dark in the room. It actually, the more I looked at it, it had no form. It should have walls and ceilings and floors, but there was nothing there. It was like the vastness of space. And I was shocked, and so I checked my body, and I realized I couldn't move. I couldn't get up. And so I looked at the light, and I saw a figure there, and I was thinking it was my sister. So I was like confused, and I needed help. And I was yelling at this figure. I was trying to tell it, because I couldn't move my body. I said, I need you to get mom and dad. I need you to get help. I can't move. And that figure kept standing there. And as that figure stood there, my awareness in the back of my head took in the light that was around the figure. And I was looking at it, and I should have seen a barn in the back, like a hay barn. And I should have seen the sky. I should have seen the vast rolling plains of where I was raised. And I didn't see any of that. And so it all clicked between the blackness and the light, and I took it all in, and this awareness hit me that I was not in the place I was raised anymore. I wasn't on the ranch anymore. I was in this in-between space that looked like the outline of the garage and the inside of the shop where it should be. And I noticed that my body, it wasn't just, I was heavy. It wasn't like I couldn't move. It was like I was in this, like a corpse, like a body that was no longer alive. But it wasn't scary, because I was feeling into the situation, and I remember contemplating where I was. And as I looked at the vastness of that space and the light that was coming in, I had this beautiful recollection or understanding that this is the space where light and life and death dwelled. And I was in that in between, and it was a beautiful experience. There was no fear. There was no worry. And I went back to that figure, and I realized obviously it wasn't my sister. And I asked, is this heaven? Is this where we go when we die? And this beautiful, overwhelming peace just came almost like a wellspring from within. And it overwhelmed me to where, yes, it was the place where we went. And yes, it was a beautiful place, but also this peace turned into this understanding that this is love. This is where love exists. Life comes from love. And so all of that understanding hit me. And I just dwelled in that in a moment for moments. And then as that kind of just settled in and subsided into that dwelling place, I call it now, I looked at the figure and I said, well, actually I didn't say anything. It switched from me speaking to the figure, though I couldn't move, speaking to the figure, to internal voices, like a knowing, like a voice inside. And from that figure, I heard a voice saying, "Are you ready?" And I remember taking just a split second. I know some people in other NDEs have these moments where they have a life review, right? I was 8. There was a very short moment. And I said yes with my inner voice to that figure. And I knew they understood because I understood them internally and I knew that they understood. And all of a sudden it's like my essence, my soul, my spirit fell into this under this wellspring of peace and love, that dwelling place of the divine where love dwells in all of us. And I remember falling into it. And as I did that, it was kind of getting dark. And there was a split second where there was a place where fear could not exist. And then I crossed this boundary and then fear could exist. And I realized that moment was when I went back into my body. And I remember waking up 3 days later and I was talking to my mother like I'm talking to you. And I stopped and I said, "Where am I? Like, what happened?" And she looked at me confused and she got irritated and left. And I had this mirror in my hand and I could only see this part of my face. And so I tilted it up. Our instinct is just to tilt it up. And I remember being in shock because I saw an orange-sized lump on my head, my forehead. And my mother, I think, then took me to the doctor and he said that I just shouldn't be alive. He said the only thing that saved me was a miracle and the fact that I was young enough that my skull kind of swelled out, not in kind of thing. But he was like, even at that he's like that I just shouldn't be alive. So in 2015, I moved to Dallas, Texas, and the next year, both my parents were diagnosed with 2 kinds of cancer. My mother in the spring, my father in the fall, and both of those kinds of cancer killed their parents or their immediate family members. And so that takes me into a situation where I had to get tested. And so I got tested for the gene mutation that gives you an 70 to 80% chance of getting all of the estrogen-based cancers, which they call the killer cancers. And I was tested positive, and then a week before my 33rd birthday, I had to go in and get tested, physical examination and such, to clear myself. And during that situation, leading up to, so realizing that both of your parents have cancer, and then you have a genetic mutation that gives you basic odds that you're going to have it by the time you're 70, because it's a 70 to 80% chance by the time I'm 70, and after that's imminent. And I know it was only 32 at the time, but the fear that built up during that, let's say, year-ish until I went into the doctor varied between denial, and then denial turns into this knowing, right? Knowing that you just don't want to accept. And so by the time I was in that doctor's office, I was in between fear and just absolute terror. I was teetering on that. And so during that situation, or during that examination, when they did not just diagnose me with breast cancer, I had bilateral breast cancer, lumps that were the size of your pinky, the top digit of your pinky on both sides. And that's it's a guarantee that you have it and it's progressed. And so after I realized that I broke down. I was in the realization of acceptance that this is it was almost like a numb acceptance of just that the terror is just settled in and you just know what you're going to have to walk through. Because my mother's mother died of ovarian cancer at her age. My mother had ovarian cancer and breast cancer. My father had melanoma and thyroid cancer. His sister and his father all died of that. And so I knew the radiation, the chemo, I knew the money that we were going to have to spend that I didn't have to get this. I knew like I was going to probably get let go of my job. It was just, I knew the hardships that I faced. And so it was just, it was the end. It was hopeless. This was the only road that I knew to go on. Because if I did take the road of the chemo, radiation, things like that, I knew what I was going to face, or I was just going to let this take me and I was just going to be done. Because to be quite frank, I just didn't want to do that road. So I want to, in full disclosure, I had a moment. I was diagnosed on a Thursday and I had 3 days before I had my emergency biopsy. So I had to get my affairs in order and such. And it was Saturday night before. It was a Saturday before I went in on Monday, and they did a 3D mammogram, an ultrasound, and a lumpectomy. And so I had this moment where I sat down and I decided, because I really thought about it. I was like, do I want to do the treatments? Do I want to do that road? And I said, no. I was okay with just allowing whatever happened to happen. And I would have however many years I would have. And so, and actually coming to that decision, even as young as I was, you can imagine how set I had to be, how firm that this decision would have been made. So I can understand when people say that they are hopeless. I can understand how people can say they live in fear, true fear, like terror, because there's no describing, honestly, unless you've been in that situation. I think that people don't understand a life-threatening situation when it comes to terror of that. People can live in fear, and I'm not degrading this, but you step over into a completely different realm of fear and terror.
What did you do, and what happened?
Well, as I said, I was in this room and it was at night, and I had this moment of realization that I just did not want to go through with anything, and I was just going to let what happened. And I remember that the room was dark, and there was a floor to ceiling window, and there was a full moon outside, and I was staying at a house with a pool, and it was surrounded by beautiful foliage, and I was just sitting staring outside and quietly in this room, maybe 8 o'clock at night, and it was silent. And I remember just dwelling in those feelings, dwelling in that knowing and that acceptance. And then something happened in the room. When I was younger and I faced what seemed to be insurmountable odds, I would go alone in nature. I would be in my room at night, and I would have those moments like I was having then. I would dwell over things, and I would contemplate, and I would come to an understanding. I would go into that dwelling place, right, and ask questions and find answers there. And so on that Saturday night, in that moment, it was like I shifted into that mindset. And I went into this dwelling place, this commune with the divine. And it's like it started stirring something in me. And I wanted to just sit with the divine, because normally I would just sit there and dwell and find peace, but it was almost like a stirring, and I didn't understand, and I was so upset because I couldn't find that sense of peace in what I decided. I couldn't find that steadiness, and so it started building and building, and I started asking. I was like, "What is this? Why am I feeling like this? Why don't I have peace about this?" And it finally built to a fever pitch where I was so angry at this discord, this dis-ease inside of me, and I was like, what do you want from me? I don't know what this is. I should feel peace. I should feel, not peace, but I should feel grounded in this. I should feel like this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to walk forward in. And all of a sudden, I remember just screaming into the void. I remember saying, if this isn't the path you want for me, I understand. I get that. You have shown me love since I was a child. I know you. I trust you. I know you're good, but I don't understand what this is. So you're going to have to show up. You're going to have to show me. You're going to have to tell me what to do. And just then, of all things, 2 Bible verses dropped into my understanding. And the first one was faith like a child, which makes total sense because that was something I clung to as a child. That was a Bible verse or a bit of wisdom that never failed me, to truly have faith in what that connection with the divine, with that which I knew, that relationship. That made sense. But the second one was I was to go before leaders in a church and have them lay hands on me and pray. And this came from a story in the Bible where people who had no money, that were very, very poor, that could not afford any kind of healthcare, would go before the leaders in the church and they would lay hands on them and pray, and they would be healed. And what you don't know about my story is that, so on Thursday I was diagnosed, and Friday I had two friends come over. They were like brothers to me. I told them about my situation, all of it, my family history, what I was going to face, and what the help I needed. And they had been very kind. They listened to me, but what I didn't know is they had started practicing laying on of hands. So they went to a church that was new to them, and they told me that they were going to lay hands on me and I was going to be healed. And of course, like, I didn't want to say no because they were my brothers. I loved them. They were very sweet, and so they did. And it was a beautiful experience. I felt very connected with them, but that was it. That's all. I didn't feel anything. There was nothing changed. And so I just sent them home on their way, and I just let it be what it was. And also, I told you I had a religious background. Part of that was going to tent revivals. I don't know if anyone knows what those are, but they would go to where the preacher was or whatever, in a tent in the middle of nowhere, and people would lay hands on people. And I still know people who are in wheelchairs or who are very sick that were not healed, or still sick to this day. And so it was just something that you just let go. It was something that I didn't doubt it was possible, but I just knew it not to be something that had happened. And so on Saturday, when those verses were shown to me, I actually doubted. I hesitated. I was like, I just want to make sure that I realize what you're saying, because I'm sure I heard you wrong, speaking to the divine in me. I was like, I'm sure I heard you wrong, because in my history, my brothers came over, it didn't work, kind of thing. And so, long story short, after long moments of debating with the divine, that assurity, like that knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that I've had before, that came 100% true through faith and reaching out, I was like, oh, well, that's what I'm going to do. So the next day I called my brothers up and I said, listen, I'm going to go to your church. And I'd been to this church before, and I ended up leaving because I had discussions with the leadership, and it just wasn't a good fit. But when I showed up that day, I walked straight up to the pastor's wife and I said, I was told by the divine, what you call God or what I call love, that I was meant to go to a church and have people lay hands on me and pray, because I have breast cancer and I'm going to die. And so she looked at me and tentatively agreed. And I was in the front pew sitting down. I couldn't even stand. I was just exhausted. I was just absolutely overwhelmed with the exhaustion of that, the emotions that I was going through. Worship started. The pastor's wife, I think she was called pastor, she brought everyone over who she had anointed as elders to lay hands on people and pray. Now, one of the reasons I did not go to this church moving forward is because they had told me and others around me that only they, the pastor wife and the pastor husband, and those that they had anointed, could do miracles and magic and harness the power of the divine, or God, I guess, because they were apostles and only they had that power. And I could not agree with that, because I knew the power of God or love as a child. I knew I'd known my own healing before. I had known, which I didn't know I was healing at the time, but I had known premonitions from God or love. I'd known knowings. And so just to let you know where I was in this, but I didn't want to doubt the divine, my connection, my relationship. And so no matter what they said, no matter how I felt towards them, I knew I was meant to do this. So I was trying to be as open as possible. So they laid hands on me and they prayed. Some were speaking in tongues, some were singing, some were, I'm fairly certain, trying to exorcise something out of me. And they stayed there for song. And the longer they stayed, just the harder I cried, because nothing was happening. I didn't feel anything. There wasn't a shift. There wasn't a knowing. There just was nothing. And so eventually they all left. All of the elders, the pastor's wife and things like that, they left. And my friend's hand was upon me. And then another hand was on the small of my back, a very tiny hand. And it just cried and cried, and with my head hung. And I remember settling into that space again within me, just turning off everything outside of me and just going to that dwelling place with the divine. And I remember speaking to it in just absolute understanding, acceptance. And I said, I still know you're good. You have proven yourself to me too many times for me to not believe in you or that. And even though this didn't work, I know the path I'm meant to take. I know what I'm going to do now, and that's okay. And so whatever your will is, I accept. And through the moment I said accept, this palm width beam of power came from the hand on the small of my back. It beelined literally through my rib cage. My torso split into two, hovered on both of those breast lumps, and stayed there for songs. Just songs. They just dwelled. They hovered there. And with my head hung and my eyes closed and just completely focused on this, it's like I could feel a pulse and a heartbeat to it. It was like white light, and it was like it was doing something. And I was just so consumed with this that eventually when it dissipated into me, it's not like it went away. It wasn't quick. It wasn't like it went away. It became part of me. I remember coming back to what I would call consciousness in that, or awareness of where I was. I remember my lips were moving. I just were repeating something. I just didn't know what it was. And then finally my awareness took in. I realized that I kept repeating, I accept this, I accept this, I accept this. And when I finally could take in the room, getting over just what was happening, when I took over the room, I was in another wave of shock because nothing outside of me had changed. They were still singing, people were still speaking in tongues, and they were still praying, and the hands were still upon me, but I was the only one that knew what happened. I was the only one that knew it. So I reached over and I took that hand that was on my back and I pulled them next to me and I sat them with me in the pew, and it was a 13-year-old girl. And I sat there looking at her and everything made sense. Like faith like a child, my faith like a child, not her faith like a child. And a miracle happened. And I knew that it took faith in my connection with the divine, my relationship with the power within, to overcome what I knew religion had done to me, what I knew wasn't true in that moment, from that church, but I knew that faith with that divinity, with that relationship with the divine, and her sweet, beautiful self doing the same thing, that is what made a miracle that day. That's what happened. And just on a personal note, I remember looking at her and I remember seeing myself in her, because this girl wasn't a girl that went to church on a regular basis. This wasn't a girl that memorized Bible verses or wore the right clothes on Sunday or was obedient. She was from a very broken home down the street that needed a safe place to go that Sunday. She wasn't even a member. She just reached out in faith. And I remember her name, she was Cece, and I will never forget that. And I told her, I said, honey, I'm going to tell you something that's going to probably be hard for you to believe or understand. But I want you to know today, through your faith, what they, pointing at the pastor and the preacher, would call God, but what I would call love, used you and your faith to heal me of cancer today. And I want you to know that that's how powerful you and love are together. And I want you to never forget that. So I'll finish it quickly. That was Sunday. And so Monday was the next day when I was supposed to get a 3D mammogram and ultrasound and a lumpectomy, which means they were going to take out the lumps, send them off and tell me what stage of the cancer it was going to be in. And they would solidify they would basically tell me where the cancer, what stage of cancer was. And if I was going to go through, which I wasn't, what the process of treatments would be. And so I go into the doctor's office with someone who was a friend at the time. And I walk into the first room, and it was the mammogram room. And there was a woman in the back. There was a mammogram machine between me and her. And she had this, she had this chart in her hand, and she was looking through it. She was flipping through it, and she was looking for something on the desk. And she seemed very flustered. And so I cleared my throat to get her attention. And she said, welcome in. Where are your breast lumps? And I think the shock, I couldn't even verbalize anything, because at the time I knew something had happened, but I was in a cancer clinic and I didn't know what had happened or what I was going to face or whatnot. So there was still the terror and the fear of what I was facing or had been facing, because that just doesn't go away. Those emotions don't go away. But again, that joy, that solid understanding something happened, the faith of that, what, like, that hadn't been defined yet, that they just live together, right? And so I was just taken back, and I was like, well, they were here, and there should have been measurements on my chart, and I don't exactly know, blah, blah, blah. And so she said, fine. She snapped the chart closed and she said, we're going to scan everything then. And I said, that's probably a good idea. And so they did it. I go back into the waiting room, wait maybe 7 minutes, and I go back to the ultrasound room. Again, me, ultrasound machine, and then there was a woman in the back. Again, she had a chart in her hand and she was flipping through something, but then she had this screen and she was zooming in and zooming out, and she was going, it was a touch screen or something, and she was flipping through these images, excuse me, and I had to clear my throat to get her attention too, because she was very flustered. And I said, excuse me. And she leaned around the ultrasound machine and she said, oh, welcome in. Where are your breast lumps? And I had gathered myself between the last scan, and I snapped back at her, and I shouldn't have, but I did. And I said, listen, I'm not here to do your job. And there should be information on that chart that measured me, had all of my treatments that they told me to. There's information on that chart and you need to find it. But also, I know that to be my mammogram scan. I know that you have them. I know that this is a 3D mammogram. It can pick up the smallest amount, the trace amount of cancer that we have in our body. So I need you to look at that scan and look at that chart and do your job for you, because I can't do it for you. And she snapped the chart shut. She's like, well, then we're going to scan everything. And she did a bit too enthusiastically for me, in my personal opinion. And as she was leaving, she said the doctor will be in to finalize everything. And so as I was sitting there trying to calm myself down because I was thinking that these people are incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. They can't find these breast lumps. There's nothing in this chart. They can't, I just couldn't imagine them not being able to find the lumps and take them out and send them off and whatever they're going to tell me. And then on top of wanting to find out what happened and having this nagging fear that I was wrong. All of this dwelling at one time. And so I was sitting there. And on top of that, I was about to get cut open. They were like, lumpectomy, they literally just numb you, cut you open, take out this lump and sew you back together and then send it off. And I'm like, it was a lot. So while I was trying to calm myself down and gather myself, this short-haired silver-haired doctor with a white coat comes flying into the room. He introduces himself and says hello. And then before I can say anything at all, he comes over, leans in, pats my left kneecap and says, thank you for coming in, Miss Cara. We'll see you when you're 40. And tries to turn around and leave the room. And I snapped, Sabrina. I just lost it. I jump up, basically half naked. I grab this man, I shake him, I turn him around, and I say, listen, I do not know what's going on, but you have lost my breast lumps. The 2 nurses that did the scans, and you have something's going on. I need you to poke around. You're going to lay me down. You're going to do an exam. You're going to find these lumps. You're going to take them out and you're going to send them off. And you're going to tell me I don't have breast cancer. And I know that is very unprofessional and probably made me look like a lunatic, but I lost it. And so he stayed there and looked at me for just a moment more, and he shook me off and he replaced his hands on my shoulders and shook me just a smidge just to loosen me up. And he said, ma'am, I have no idea what you're talking about, but we have done every scan we need to find anything within you. There is no cancer. There is no lumps. There's nothing to find. And then turned around and left the room. And everything hit me at one time. And I remember stumbling back and sitting down on the ultrasound machine table. And I remember having to face what I was about to do, because the breast lumps that I had, one of them was so far out of my breast tissue, you could feel it. You could tangibly feel it. And when I was originally on Thursday, when I was diagnosed, the nurse could tell I was having such a hard time accepting it. I just would not do it. And so she literally took both of my hands and she found that breast lumps, and together she pressed down so I could feel it, so I could tangibly touch it. And then she had this false breast, and she did the same thing and compared that lump to what a cancer lump actually feels like. And so in that ultrasound machine room, knowing everything I had just faced, my hands were like shaking. I lifted that gown and I put my hands where that lump was and I pressed down. And Sabrina, there was a pinky sized with divot in my rib cage and a bruise sensation. And that was the only evidence anything was ever there. Love had dissolved death within me. It had taken away, it just taken it away. It made it disappear. It renewed me. It made me anew. And I never thought, it never crossed my mind ever that I thought that something had happened. It had encapsulated the cancer and I was taking it out and they wouldn't find any more, or maybe it was a misdiagnosis or something like that. Because I knew something had happened. I knew something had changed in those moments. I knew I had been healed, but I didn't know I had been made new. That it was just one. I was not prepared for that kind of love. I just was not. In that moment, I was changed. I, as a person, changed. And I knew the unlimited power of love within me. I knew the limits. There was the limitlessness that love would go to reach me, to know me, to connect with me, to allow me to understand beyond a shadow of doubt that it was real and it was true and it was there for me. And that has never left me. And not only that moment was defining all the other moments before, all those moments as a childhood with the near-death experience and the premonitions of loved ones' deaths and all these moments of real resilience. I needed to get through tragedies and traumas, and it all made sense that love, what I'd known in my NDE, what the power of the universe that held everything together was love. And it was so intimately connected with me and unlimitedly powerful. And I was one with it. And that creates an understanding that anything is possible. Anything. And I have never been the same.